So, in lesson one, we're going to be looking at resource management. And the everyday phenomenon is how can we manage renewable resources for sustainable use? Now, take 2 minutes here, pause the video, and let's kind of think about this. Let's focus and take 2 minutes to discuss with a partner whether the following statement is true. So instead of with a partner, just kind of write it down. Renewable resources cannot run out, no matter how much humans use them. So use that quote and record your ideas and what conclusions you come up with about this. So this is just on your own and just write it down or think about it. Renewable resources cannot run out, no matter how much we use them. So take 2 minutes and record that. Pause the video. So, most of the resources we take from the world are limited, and resources such as soil, fresh water, wild animals, and timber are considered a renewable energy source, meaning that given enough time, they will replace themselves. But even renewable resources can run out if they are not harvested sustainably. Now, what this term sustainably means is removing resources only as rapidly as they can be replaced. So again, we are only taking what nature can replace themselves. So again, this is a key of being sustainable. We are not overusing our resources, but instead we are taking what the world is giving us. Now, when we're looking at resource management or is the managing of a resource oops, or resource harvesting so that resources are not depleted. So again, this is resource management so that they do not disappear. Now, resource managers are guided in their decision makings by a few things. First of all, scientific research. We are looking maybe at the life cycle of a particular tree or of an animal, figuring out how quickly can these individuals replace themselves. Another big component that sometimes takes the front seat is politics, right? If the government wants to harvest all the trees, right, that there's a much bigger push, even if the scientific research is not there to support it. Because politics is often driven by economics. So, the economic side of things as well is a big push for resource management. And finally, we have social issues. Okay, those social issues of maybe like the housing crisis and being able to have cheap and affordable materials in order to build those particular things. Now, a key question in managing resources is whether to focus on specific resource or to consider the entire ecosystem of which the resource is part of. So, considering the entire ecosystem, okay, so if we consider the entire ecosystem, it makes resource management more complicated, but it is the best way to protect a research. So, again, it's really important to not only consider the individual animal, but considering the entire ecosystem. So, how does cutting down the tree affect the fish, affect the trees, affect the soil? So, it makes resource management more complicated, but is a very big necessity. But again, this is the best way to protect the resource. Again, considering the entire ecosystem, not just an individual animal. So, our civilization depends on many renewable resources that include things like timber or the lumber industry. Okay. Also, the soil of which we grow crops and support animals, as well as fresh water that we drink and we use to irrigate our crops. And finally, wild animals. All of these things civilization depends on. So again, it is important. Let's rewrite this. I don't know, it's getting wild. So wild animals. It's important that we are managing all of these the best way possible. So let's start with our first one here of soil. Now, soil is always being made by natural processes such as weathering, where we're breaking rock down to make more soil, and erosion of rocks, as well as the decomposition of organisms for the development of soil. Now, what we are developing in this process is something called topsoil. And topsoil is this fertile top layer of soil. And again, this is what plants will grow in. And this layer is made very slowly. It takes a long time to kind of replace this. So, in other words, it is 1 inch can take about 100 years in order to make. So if we mismanage our soil, this can be something that is extremely difficult to replace. So if we misuse the resource, it can completely disappear. And people need to maintain the quantity and quality of existing topsoils.
So our other renewable resource that we have is fresh water. So like soil, fresh water is continually supplied by natural process. So when we're looking at fresh water, we're looking at the water cycle. Now, people need to maintain the quality of water for a few things. First of all, for drinking, we need water in order to survive. So drinking water is something that's very important. We also need it to grow our crops in terms of agriculture, as well as it is very crucial for the wildlife that we have in this country, right? They need water as well. And finally, we need it to produce a functioning ecosystem. So without water, we have no ecosystem that can survive. Now, wild animals are something that are really important to this country in the sense that all of the citizens have the right to these animals. So people have always hunted animals for food, and animals that can be hunted legally are called game. Now, in the United States, the state and federal wildlife managements, they regulate the hunting of game. And they do so to maintain population of these animals. And again, they're doing so at their own desired level. So again, the state and federal wildlife managements are the ones that are regulating this thing. Now, sometimes, right, these wild animals, depending on what you're looking at, can drastically drop. So, despite management of fisheries, the population of many of these aquatic animals have drastically dropped. So fish, tuna, things like that. The the fishermen have gotten way, or the technology of fishermen have way outweighed kind of this management practice that they have. So when we're looking at these fleets, right, of enormous technologically advanced fishing boats, or another name for these are trawlers. These trawlers are swarming the ocean, and most of them use technology like sonar to find fish, mechanized nets that they can use bigger nets in order to catch their fish, as well as satellite images to kind of track the fish. So again, the technology is outweighing the harvest of these animals to find fish. Now, poaching is another big problem, and laws are only as effective as their enforcement. So people kill animals for two things when they poach: for food or for sport, in order to maybe take their ivories or take their skulls, whatever, and selling it on these black markets. So, in order to prevent poaching, there was a treaty that was signed, which is called CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. Now, what CITES does is, or has done, is they have reduced the poaching of endangered animals. So in CITES, what they do is they prevent the trade of these animals. You often see or hear of, I don't know, turtles being confiscated in an airport, or the illegal trading of furs. CITES is the one that enforces this law. Now, pets is another big one with poaching. So this zoo employees holding scarlet macaws that were rescued from poachers, and the poachers were intending to sell the macaws as pets. So again, this is an illegal trade. So monitoring trade is very difficult, especially in these remote areas, as well as these um, developing nations. It's very difficult to kind of enforce these. Again, enforcing these laws is as good as the individuals who are able to enforce and find them. So, what you should do next is read this paragraph here on resource management. And from that paragraph, think about the word and the definition, and then reword the definition to include the word sustainable or sustainably. So, on your own, take 2 minutes and write this new definition for yourself. Pause the video, and when you're done, hit play again. Now, North America model of wildlife conservation is one that is envied by most of the world. We have a seven-pillar approach that protects and funds these wildlife management practices. So the first pillar of the North American model is that wildlife is in a public trust, which means that animals belong to everyone. This is one of the big ones because of our British descent, where the game animals were property of the king, and you could almost be killed or executed for hunting and killing the king's animals. So we put into our model that they belong to everyone. We also eliminated market hunting. So again, what market hunting is commercial hunting. So in the United States, we have no commercial hunting of wildlife. The other thing is our third pillar is that it's democratic rule of law, meaning every citizen has equal hunting rights. So you as a citizen have the same right as somebody who's a billionaire or somebody who doesn't own anything. So this kind of ties in with the fourth pillar of the hunting opportunity for all. So in the United States or North America, we allow fair access across social classes, as well as our fifth pillar, which is non-frivolous use, meaning that wildlife should only be killed for legitimate reasons. So our sixth pillar is international resources. So wildlife and fish move across boundaries. So in other words, it's not that we're just worrying about the game animals in the United States, but remember, migratory birds like ducks, they go from Canada through the United States to Mexico to South America. So internationally, we have to come together to figure out a management practice. And the seventh pillar that we have is that our wildlife conservation is scientifically managed, meaning it is science based. So we have science based research that enforces our policy. So again, it's not just a knee jerk reaction. We are looking at the scientific evidence. Now, where the funding? So the primary funding for the seven prong wildlife conservation comes from the Pittman-Robertson Act of 1937. Now, this act puts 11% tax on hunting equipment and ammunition. And what that does is it funds wildlife restoration projects. Now, in 1950, we added to this and implemented the Dingell-Johnson Act. Now, the Dingell-Johnson Act put a 10% tax on fishing equipment. So this was helping to support fish conservation. So now the hunters and fishermen are the ones that are directly funding. There's a direct revenue put in place. The state agencies also get direct revenue for state conservations, not only from these taxes, but also um, from hunting and fishing licenses. Okay. So this helps to maintain wildlife populations. And again, it's funded by the individuals that are most vested. So when we look at this in terms of a conservation success story, when we started implementing these in the 1900s, right? The population of wild game in our country was crashing. Wild turkey in the 1900s was about at 30,000. Today, those numbers have increased to about 30 million. White-tailed deer, their numbers were all the way down to 300,000 across their effective range. Today, this number is about 31.7 million deer in North America. And finally, we have wood ducks. Now, wood ducks were near extinction. And again, today, that number has climbed to about 7 million individuals. So again, this Conservation Act was the one that was funding the success stories. So another type of renewable resource we're looking at is timber or wood from trees. Now, this is the raw material for an amazing variety of products. So the products that we use from wood would be building materials for homes, for schools, for buildings. We also want to look for furniture that is wood-based products. Paper, another one that is a wood-based product. as well as packing material, and even some fabric. It's called rayon fabric and pencils. So again, there's a wide variety of products that are produced. Now, where we're seeing most of this stuff coming from is the deforestation of our forests. Now, the one that is being the most deforested are the tropical rainforests. Again, they are cutting those down and we're losing a lot during that time. But we are actually gaining some forest in a smaller amount in temperate zones. So again, there are some areas that are shrinking drastically, like the tropical forests, but some are getting bigger. So that leads us to our management approaches. So how do we manage the forest so that we can use these products, but also maintain it sustainably for the future? So the management of different areas at different times under different political leaderships puts different sorts of pressure on resource management. And the three most common resource management approaches that we're going to talk about are sustainable yield, ecosystem-based management, as well as adaptive management. So again, these three approaches are how we are going to successfully harvest our product. Now, with maximum sustainable yield, or MSY, this aims to harvest the maximum amount of a resource without reducing future yield. In other words, we are not affecting our future product by doing this. Okay. So again, we want to make sure we're taking the amount that's going to replace itself in a given year. So a population of resources grows quickly when it is in this intermediate size right here. Okay. So a large population, one that's up on the top, grows very slowly. So the goal of MSY aims to keep the population well below the carrying capacity. And by keeping it below that carrying capacity, the population grows fastest, meaning we are going to replace the most amount of product. Now, ecosystem-based management um, is to harvest a resource in ways that minimize impact on ecosystem and ecological processes. So again, we are reducing our impact on the entire ecosystem. So the plan of this, of ecosystem-based management, takes three forms. First of all, so we are going to be managing ecologically important areas. We're also going to be considering patterns in plant cover. And finally, we're going to be protecting some forested areas. In other words, we are not affecting the entire ecosystem, but only taking small parts. Now, there are some challenges of ecosystem-based management. So it is challenging for managers to determine how best to put this into action. Because of really just kind of how dynamic ecosystems are. So ecosystems are very complex, and our understanding of how they work is incomplete. So ecosystem-based management can mean different things to different people. And what this does is it leads to inconsistent management. So again, it's really difficult when we're looking at the big picture. So the last one we have is adaptive management. And this involves scientifically testing different management approaches. Okay. And from those, one after another, we then customize an approach based on the results. So this is intended as a true union of scientists management because hypotheses about how best to manage the resources are tested. And they're tested under a control setting. So again, from these tests, it requires managers and scientists to closely monitor. And then we monitor those current practices and continually adjust them in order to get our best results. So again, that is more of the adaptive approach where we are using scientific evidence to change how we are doing it. So in our adaptive management, this requires constant monitoring of resource and adjustments to the management as a cycle diagram shows. So the time and effort can be richly rewarding. However, as in the case of successful ecological restoration projects, so again, you assess the problem and then you create a design and you implement that design. You monitor, you evaluate, and then from there, you adjust. And again, by adjusting, you are then putting your best approach forward. All right, don't forget after you have completed the video, make sure you are answering the end of lesson questions. So this would be lesson 1, chapter 11.